Here it is. You guys have asked for it several times on my Lilith videos. Lilith in a man's chart. We are here. We are finally going to dive in. And guess what, you guys? I have created your own Lilith worksheets. Yes, they're on sale now in my Etsy. This benefits you in being able to dive into your own shadow work, understand all four Liliths in your chart. You also have prompts to help really evoke your dark goddess energy. If you guys would like to check those out, check the link below. Let's dive into how I like to interpret Lilith in a man's chart. Okay. Lilith in the man's chart is going to showcase to you the energy of someone who can turn his whole life upside down. Lilith in the man's chart is also the person who is going to be extremely provocative, and provocative in both terms. Provocative sexually, like really just pulling at his and harnessing that energy, but also provoking because Lilith's energy is still connected to the moon. And in a man's chart, she is kind of either a rebel of his maternal world and how he knows it, right? So how the women in his life took care of him is kind of like the cloak of his emotional world. So she'll either be a rebel of that and like show him another, like if you could see that Lilith is a part of queendoms and that she can have wars with other queens, you know, that the feminine can be looking for their own lots too, right? So a Lilith in his chart could be someone who wants to show him another world of the feminine and kind of rebel against what he knows, okay? And this could also be what makes it very provoking. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this Lilith could also emulate the same kind of energy that he came from, and showing him a safer world. It really is dependent on the person and how also the aspects are being played and all of those things. But I just want to touch on the fact that Lilith is hitting on the part of the man's mind that is connected to the matriarch. And so this is why she can have so much power. Like even in certain cases, a stranger could turn this man's world upside down. So the metaphor that I like to use for this is teaching someone how to fish. There's a saying that goes, if you fish for someone, they'll eat for a day. But if you teach them how to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. And I think that this works in both ways. I think that Lilith can be that for him, that she could be an instant gratification, right, to all of our lustful desires or all of his lustful desires. But she could also teach him how to harness his feminine energy so that he gets what he wants for a lifetime. And I think that it goes the other way around. I think that Lilith in a man's chart is an external figure that can also be looking for him to provide for her. And if he's evoked in ways that victimize him, he may overcompensate, overprovide. And if he is working on his feminine energy and harnessing it, then he also teaches her how to be able to independently provide for herself. The general idea that I want to bring to you about Lilith in a man's chart is the deep feeling of rejection that a man has felt, right, in some sort of breakup situation, right, maybe with a girl, or ever having an experience where a man has tried to make his move. You can also find that Lilith is a very deep subconscious of rejection or fear of rejection from mother or the matriarch or whatever was the maternal figures in his life. So there is also a metaphor that I'd like to bring to the table. You'll hear me in the breakdowns use it sometimes in the way that I like to see it as a solution. And it comes from a concept of, everyone's heard it before. If you teach a man to fish, right, he can fish for his life. But if you like just fish for him for that day, then he's able to enjoy the meal, but doesn't have the skills to keep going. And so with Lilith, you can apply this concept to solutions, and that's what I will be doing in the breakdown. It's important to understand that in the general videos that I have about Lilith, that still can apply to a man's chart. Lilith is the feminine nature within himself and can be a role of a very provocative and sexually and sensually alluring feminine externally of himself, okay? And in this breakdown, I actually allow you to see how when he nurtures the erratic feminine nature within himself, he's actually able to provide for the external feminine that's in his life. So yes, in these breakdowns, I can't speak. In these breakdowns, I really do see Lilith as a either sexual partner, a crush, or somebody that he's with, and it may not be that this person is embodying all of Lilith, but it may trigger the very things that I speak about when I break this down. However, some of you may find that the feminine external really does embody Lilith, that she is the entire Lilith that we're speaking of. And so, I just want to make sure you guys understand the variety of how this goes. But I do approach this in the sense of Lilith being a provocative feminine external entity, and how he can learn how to harness his own erratic feminine energy in order to show up as a more suave and provocative, intoxicating masculine energy. And it's so much more about the nuances of what I'm saying here versus the extremes. So I just kindly advise you to take everything in and contemplate on it and understand its energy is kind of hidden. It's not always visible. And also don't judge anyone just for their placement. Okay, so let's go into Lilith in a man's chart. Lilith in the first house of a man's chart is physically provocative and is the kind of essential undercurrent of what we understand of all masculine energy. It goes without saying that the masculine is deeply visual. And when Lilith is in the first house, we see this as the primal energy of all masculine energies. No matter what zodiac sign you have in the first house, it still embodies the energy of Aries and Mars, which is deeply connected to sexual primal urges. And with Lilith in the first house, she evokes that classically through her physicality and the sexiness of her curves and how her body is shaped. Now, when it comes to overcompensating, it's very possible that a man might overcompensate with Lilith in his first house by becoming her superhero. And it's not to say that he can't help her out and he can't be her superhero, but if he's always trying to help her, she can lose her independence here for sure. And so a man has to recognize the provocative nature of Lilith and how much she can evoke all kinds of things from him on a deep emotional level, coming from his matriarchal upbringing. And so he may have fears of being rejected from her by him not being sexy enough, or things like that. But overall, the fears are coming from his upbringing, and it's evoked through the physical. And it really probably depends on the man what those fears would be. What Lilith is able to do for him, right? If she fishes for him, basically, right, instead of teaching him how to fish, then she lets him indulge in her physicality in the most quickness. With the Aries energy in the first house, they can quickly jump right into things together, and this could be satisfying, but it classically won't be strong enough because there could be a codependency here that happens, and with that loss of independence that he's overcompensating. And she could also be providing for him sexual pleasure at such an easy rate without really teaching him how to approach her and how to handle her energy, because she might be very vivacious and independent herself. So with Lilith in the man's chart, they're working through these energies. And when he's able to harness this, he can become somebody who can help her in a lot of ways, even like save her in certain cases, but more than likely will help her, teach her how to save herself. You know, going back to the metaphor, teaching her how to fish would be teaching her how to save herself. And again, for him, she would be teaching him how to fish by teaching him how to actually approach her in a way that he could get everything that he wants out of her, right, without just giving it up all to him all so quickly. Now, in their most sovereign right, they can do whatever they want, but this is where the turbulence can happen, the overcompensating and the emotional reactions that can happen here. So, you know, it's not about playing by any sort of rules, but it's just about finding that finesse that can harness this energy and be conscious of each other, and be loving of their weaknesses. If they're able to accomplish that, then this placement, a Lilith in the man's chart, could be very exciting, and he could be known for a long time. Like the first house, she could really help him advance. She could be somebody that makes him, you know, superstar in many ways. You'll see that men who have Lilith in the first house are very well known, and they're few and far in between as well. But the ones that are, they're deeply loved. You know, they're especially deeply loved by women, and they're able to harness that sexual energy, no matter how sexual they may portray themselves as well. Their sexuality becomes very not intimidating to women, not overpowering or misogynistic, but welcoming and exciting and freeing as well. He may have experienced rejections that had literally to do with his physical body, his appearance, or his personality. And he quite often may find these patterns to show up in relationships with the feminine. You'll also find that there may have been a deep fear of rejection as well from the mother, right? Or the mother could have actually applied a lot of her attention towards these parts, like his presentation, how good he looks, and things like that. So it could be that there was some sort of rejection, or it was actually a nurturing thing that could have happened. But still, you'll find that with the story of Lilith, we're dealing with feeling like an outcast. We're dealing with feeling like rejection. And so this could show up as even the most, you know, well-dressed, well-kept man could still have these fears of rejection. Okay, so in order to understand how to bring the solution in with the concept of teaching a man to fish, right? The biggest thing would be to understand that the more that he learns how to take care of his own physical presence, the stronger that he'll feel, rather than relying so much on a feminine mirror projection to make him feel better about his appearance. This will help to bring in more consciousness of his own sexual appeal, his own ability to initiate and take take the first step on something. He naturally wants to be a superhero to Lilith. And this could also be something that is useful for the feminine in his life. He could be like that first responder to the feminine in his life. However, that would also be a great solution in this regards to the fish theory, in which he's teaching her how to be more independent on her own, so that he's not always showing up right as her superhero. And that would be my breakdown of Lilith in the first house of the man's chart. Okay, Lilith in the second house. Now, a man who has Lilith in the second house is deeply provoked by a feminine energy that really understands her worth and thinks really highly of herself. And she, typically is going to have, things and possessions about her that are really, really exotic, and shows that she's from a very high class, or has high taste if she's not from a high class. And she's really a diamond, like something that, he would have to work his whole lifetime to be able to afford. And that might be the very thing that's provocative about it. Recognizing the emotional pulls that come from this could be in rebellion, right, to the matriarch or maternal world, that if he had one, where he was taught to not want so much things and to not have so much luxuries and lux. And he might have really been provoked by Lilith because she promises a whole different kind of world. But it could also be that she is just the same upgrade from where he comes from, and he desperately needs to externalize the same thing. So it's not always, it's you could still have both occasions. And the thing is that Lilith is just pulling at those emotional places, right? You could have someone who came from poverty or someone who came from wealth, but Lilith herself is either a rebel to what he came from, or just the same thing because it's his security and comfort. So and I really would like to put this with the zodiac signs in a way that you would understand it, because it may not always be the same exact things. He might value certain things according to the zodiac sign that would show it differently. Like, let's say like if she has a certain value of, I don't know, taking care of her body a certain way, right? He might really be intrigued by how much she values her body versus growing up in a situation where someone was told to not value your body and to not take it as anything worthwhile. I mean, like, it could be in so many ways that, but whatever it is, there's something that she possesses that he highly finds to be very provocative, whether it's herself, her values, or the things that she owns. It could be very much so, very, very exotic rings and all kinds of fashion designer materials. I mean, the thing could go on and on, but truly Lilith usually showcases the highest possibility, a sovereignty of value. Now, sometimes Lilith can show up also as someone who actually strips him of his value. And how would this happen? Well, it could be very much that he has fears of rejection, and so he overcompensates by overspending on her. She could strip him of his value and be a rebellion because maybe he had a certain type of value, right? So this could be, let's say it was, Libra here. This could be value in fashion, but I'd love to talk about like justice, like a political. Maybe he had a certain political value, and that he gets with someone who evokes his Lilith in the second house, or someone, who is participating as a Lilith to his second house. They don't necessarily have to have Lilith in the second house. That would be a synastry report. Lilith can just be embodied by somebody who just really represents it, right? So let's say that she is someone who has a different type of political value than him, then she could kind of disrupt his whole life because he's deeply provoked by that. Not only is he sexually turned on by it, but he could also be turning his whole life and everything upside down. So the second house can be, one that allows us to look at various possibilities of how this works out. Now, for her to, going to the fishing metaphor, for her to fish for him would be for her to kind of basically give up all of her goods, like everything that she's got, to him. And for her to teach him how to fish would be for her to show him how to upgrade himself. And it would be vice versa, for him to provide for her would be for him to overspend on her, right? Overcompensate would be to overspend, but maybe for him to really teach her how to fish. In that concept of metaphor, they might have a relationship in which he is showing her how to manage her money, or how to sell some of her stuff, or helping her to upgrade it to something even better. It could be anything like that. But when they work together is really the idea, versus tearing each other apart due to the reactionary level of Lilith and the destruction energy that does happen with Lilith as well. But deeply, this can create such an incredible bond over security and wealth, and could truly help so many people, as an example with Lilith in his second house. Okay, so more than likely he has a fear of being rejected because of the things that he has, right? His ability to make money as well is an important part, and how much money he can make. But still, the rejection will be there whether he is successful at this or not. That will be the trigger that you'll see. He might really like exotic things, and is into kind of quirky but very high valuable things as well. Now, this may also have been a care from the matriarch in his life that taught him how to really care for his things. But it could also be the opposite, right? We could have some sort of rejection that may have happened, so that he's kind of erratic, because Lilith is erratic, so we don't stay in one place. It's kind of always moving back and forth. And so he may have felt like, yeah, he knows how to take care of his things, but you might find that either he's a bit of a hoarder, or he doesn't take care of his things, or buys cheap things, or things like that, doesn't really highly value himself and things like that. Okay, so what really wants to happen here is for the solution to be clearly for him to create an independent life with his possessions. And this will actually work across the board, because everything is a possession in the second house, including people. And I think he really wants to provide for the feminine in his life, right? So he wants to feel accepted for his ability to give money, to take care, to, buy the things that we all need, right? And for Lilith, he will do this for. So for the feminine, he will do this for, but he has to just really be careful, right? Once he has developed his own sense of worth, the way that he approaches Lilith, he might overcompensate and is always buying and always, buying love for Lilith, instead of teaching Lilith how to value her own worth, right? And so she is not always in need of his income and his value. She can be more independent, okay? So if we look at Lilith in the third house, she is actually very provocative to him based off of how she speaks. Provocative that she could be very sexy to him in her tones, inflections, and her attitude, but she could also be very provoking, because he could have somebody in his life that really gets under his skin by how they speak. And this would be the Lilith in his chart, kind of showing her ass there. And so what could happen here is like the man overcompensating, could be trying to overtalk each other, having clearly listening and talking issues. Complete silence and ignoring could also be a part of this, from the fears of rejection on both sides, and as well as the innate need to be the one who has the better truth kind of idea that could happen here. And they could also, Lilith can be really provoking the lower mind. So in a man's chart, Lilith could be pulling on him to think a little bit more negatively, and he can overcompensate by taking it there, and it could be kind of it could have an endless dig. There could be endless digs, verbal digs. And I think that with Lilith energy here, that in a man's chart, he's really looking to find a path of understanding that he can lead with Lilith. And it actually evokes a lot of his femininity, because he when he takes the path of listening, he probably could get further ahead. And this could be difficult for some masculine energies because of their need to mansplain, which could also happen here in the third house. And so with Lilith in the third house, we're seeing someone who can take that feminine energy, a man who could take that feminine energy and kind of become beyond his own communication. He could understand something that would not be something he would understand, and expand it on a level, and expand himself, his own comprehension, on a level in which he can communicate with people in vast ways. This is the sovereignty that Lilith can really provide for him if he's willing to, conquer his fears of rejection. This is somebody who can be very very enticing with their words, when he knows when to listen and when to speak, thanks to his learning how to fish through Lilith. And she can really captivate. Lilith in her highest level in a man's chart in the third house can really captivate him to use his words, to use his hands, use his body language, use his own attitude and swag to make an imprint on the world, so she can really evoke the feminine part of him that makes him a dancer, that makes him flow better, that makes him communicate better, and he just becomes well-rounded in the sovereignty of the feminine that once provoked him can now almost he can embody and harness. So Lilith in the third house, he can gain a deep sovereign skill to communicate, in especially in his words, language, and media. Media is a third house as well. He could be incredible media personality thanks to his owning of his own feminine energy, and the destructive part of it as well, knowing how to kind of destroy his own need to mansplain and know when to listen, and how listening can provide for him so much more information so that he can conquer and can be dominant in the areas of life that he'd like to be. He might have a rejection or fear of rejection for the way that he speaks, for the style of his, his swag, basically. And yeah, his overall communication may be what he fears of rejection. Could have been from the matriarch, deeply nourished, maybe knows a lot of languages, maybe is considered well-spoken, but could also be the opposite and be more erratic, kind of choose to curse and swear and take things all the place out, sometimes maybe even speech impediments. Is that the word, impediments? You guys let me know. Speech, it might need speech therapy, like some sort of speech issues. And so he really wants to be the solution for Lilith, the communicator, right? But this can lead to a lot of mansplaining, I would say, for Lilith in the third house. So there's a deep need to work on his ability to listen, and also give Lilith the floor, give the feminine in his life more of the time to speak, and then help them to make a more direct way or attitude or swag to their language, because the conscious male, right, has the light that the murky waters of Lilith need. So there could be a lot of confusion or a lot of ways that Lilith speaks that could improve, and so he's also helping her. So they share that fear of rejection as well. Excuse me, that fear of an outcast by the way that they speak. And so together, that's how they can work each other out. Otherwise, again, it becomes overcompensating and mansplaining, or taking the floor, or jumping the conversation, which can create real turbulence, right? Okay, in the fourth house, he has a deep rejection for his emotional state and a deep fear of that rejection, and may have felt in his life that he didn't get to be vulnerable, and really has challenges with his own emotions, whether it's really revealing or whether it's pretty stoic and kind of cold. And in this situation, he's really trying to help Lilith shelter her own emotion. So he could be like a provider of a home, provider of a house. And the key would be to help Lilith, like the concept of home is something that's more internal, a place that you feel safe and sheltered from. So helping Lilith to find that within herself. Maybe she has had experiences of being rejected by the home or being rejected by their heritage. Maybe he has too. So they're dealing with that feeling of being an outcast, of being rejected. And this could be a situation where they both find themselves in the extremities of being homeless, all the way to the extremities of having, a really lavish home. And the beauty of this is really connected more to the emotions of forgiveness and compassion. And I think that the solution with the whole teaching a man the fish thing is that they're not just being nice and kind for nurturing's sake, but helping one another to be able to have their own independent emotional regulation, right? So that there is a deep understanding of the word enmeshment, which is like a psychology word that's connected to kind of being in this codependency situation. And I think it's more enmeshment is more connected to maybe parents and children, but there could be that codependency that can be very intense here if they only just feed each other fish rather than teaching each other how to fish, which is, maybe sharing the the need to get better at regulating their own emotions, taking more accountability for their reactions, having forgiveness for what has been said. Like, that's going to be probably one of the harder things, because forgiveness is something that really happens inside of you, to have peace with what the past has been. So this one is really taking a lot of emotional work to the table. And if they do it together, they succeed in being, a very strong power couple for how it works, how people become one. Now, power couple, I said couple, but, not just in love. Lilith doesn't just have to be a feminine love nature. It could, even though she can be, and she's very provocative, and maybe I'll do another version of that. I always want to. But yeah, so the fourth house, she is more connected to her emotions and the rejection of her emotions, and so is he. Now, Lilith in a man's fourth house is going to really be more conscious here. He will be, I feel, of his energy towards the maternal and his mothering, because it's a natural place for it. And he may recognize the needs that he needs based off of what he did or didn't get in his upbringing. A man who has Lilith in the fourth house is deeply provoked by someone who stirs his own emotional world. So he might be comfortable with her making him uncomfortable. And I think that can be very provocative and very exciting to him. And I think that when they, get intense and really get sexual with each other, which Lilith will want to do with a man in every part of the chart, he's going to want to explore that because of the enticement that she gives him. In the fourth house, he's deeply connected to the essence of what makes her woman, or what makes her feminine, and it's almost like drinking milk for him. It's deeply nourishing. And I think that that's really what it's like for them. And I think that they are deeply fond of Lilith when they're provoked with Lilith in the fourth house. So what is happening here is that if he's had a little bit less of a great experience with his mother or matriarch in his life, then Lilith becomes a deep rebel and comforts him. And I think that we would find this often, especially if you have other things here like, Chiron or things like that. But with Lilith being in the fourth house, her instant gratification that she gives him is like, it's kind of like just cooking on demand, like getting that person that will cook a deep plate for you, and you enjoy that warm plate and you're in heaven. And what Lilith really can do for him, so that he doesn't feel crippled, or that he doesn't expect it from her, so that she loses her power, her emotional power, or has to constantly be feeding him, right? Is the need to teach him how to conjure up his own comforting feelings. And that would be like Lilith really teaching him how to fish. Now, what happens here on the flip side, like let's say he might be overcompensating with Lilith in the fourth house. He might be like over mothering her and might be emotionally tapping into that part. Might be, I feel like it's a part of a chart that can make him become less respected due to the fourth house position of it being in the place that it is. It's so powerful because the fourth house is a part of the foundation of what makes us who we are. I feel like Lilith in the fourth house can create a lot of belittling in her most destructive energy. And I feel like a man will belittle himself for a woman on any regards if he is easily triggered, easily reactive, or easily, provoked emotionally. He can start to feel emotional little, feel like a little boy again, even. And I think that the key here is him being able to provide for Lilith versus Lilith providing for him too much here. I think that he can easily find mommy role with Lilith in the fourth house. And to provide for Lilith might be really bizarre because it's almost unnatural in the sense of where the emotions are. You know, like the emotions don't recognize that this isn't my mother. The emotions just feel the feelings. So I think that what he provides to Lilith is I'm gonna say it's based off of him, but it's deeply connected to him being able to kind of teach Lilith how to have her own life. I feel like he's big. That could really be one of the ways so that Lilith lets go of the clinginess that can happen over him. And, you know, it doesn't matter who's the one who's doing it, but it's prone to happen. And so, from this place of codependency that can also happen here in the fourth house, he is freeing himself by providing for Lilith the world of which is outside of the two of them, the outside world beyond what they create. And I think that Lilith creates a provocatively private and comforting world for him. And that's kind of like her fishing for him. And what she really needs to do is teach him how to comfort himself so that he can be back out in the outside world comforting himself. And he needs to teach her that, you know, or provide for her that sense of beyond him, that you can have a life beyond me, so that she can kind of relieve herself of being under and in the comfort of his own shelter. He could probably feel like a shelter to her. So a man who has Lilith in his fourth house is kind of dealing with his power to shelter her. But if he over shelters her, he only is fishing for her for a day, and she will constantly seek that shelter from him instead of providing for her how to build her own shelter, how to comfort herself into the world, so that that codependency will dissipate and they could truly be, connected to one another. Lilith in the fifth house in a man's chart. Lilith is experienced here as the fear of rejection from the feminine, probably in some sort of dating situation for sure, especially with it being in the fifth house. And the biggest thing is the fear of his showmanship and his ego, so like his expression. And he can be actually feel like he's rejected, and can actually be very like sensitive to Lilith's rejection in the fifth house, probably more so than any of the ones I've actually mentioned. And that's because the ego is very fragile, and the fifth house is also our joy. And our joy, actually, it needs to be catered to like a child does. And so rejection in the fifth house can be really, really difficult. But there's also something really incredible about the fifth house that I feel also I haven't spoken about, but really it applies to all placements when it comes to Lilith in a man's chart. And that is the fact that there's a concept called the rake. And when a man is almost meets the level of being highly sexually provocative, highly flirtatious, highly enchanting himself, right? Now, every man has this capacity where Lilith is in his chart, because Lilith would be him nurturing his feminine nature. But in the fifth house, we really see how that comes to be. So men who have Lilith in the fifth house, when they're able to overcome their fears and phobias, they will recognize that embodying their joy and embodying their showmanship makes them become this like incredibly enticing masculine energy that basically everyone wants to flirt with, everyone wants to have enjoyable casual love sessions with, hookups with, and things like that. So the thing with here is that like all the positions, he has to use Lilith to nurture and nourish himself in order to combat the rejection and the fears of rejection. And this is why Lilith can also be something that slips through a man's fingers, in the sense of she can really bring him to his knees, she could really make him feel crippled, and all of those things. because of his need to nourish himself on that deep subconscious level. When he's able to do so and kind of feed back to himself his own sense of expression and joy, and how highly intoxicating and joyous it is, then he will become and embody his own feminine energy, and then he becomes very attractive, like I've already said. So the key here is to understand that also he wants to provide for the Lilith, so he wants to be the entertainer. Can we say like the male Chippendales is like a perfect position for Lilith in the fifth house? He wants to be an entertainer to her, and he may do everything, pull out all the stops, pull out the most extravagant, show off thing in order to serve the feminine and the Lilith in his life. And when he's really showed off for himself, he's really on his game, right? But when he does it for Lilith or the feminine in his life, he also will be on his game. And the thing here is, again, that concept of teaching a person to fish versus not. So more than likely, the feminine in his life might also need to learn how to become her own entertainer, how to become her own joy, right? Because if he's providing joy for her, then that creates another situation where the feminine Lilith doesn't know how to create joy for herself, right? So this is why we can be prone to rejection as well, because we are looking for joy from another person, whether you're the man or the female, it doesn't matter. It ends up being that case. So when we're able to nourish ourselves the same way, then we get what we want on both accords. And so that's Lilith in the fifth house. In the sixth house, basically, Lilith in the sixth house in a man's chart, he becomes her errand boy, and he's just like running around and doing everything for Lilith. And Lilith can also be extremely critical of him, and so this kind of rejection creates a real it creates a really low sense of value. I feel like that also happens in the second house, but it can also happen here in the sixth house. So the key here is for him to overcome his fears of rejection. And where naturally you're going to want to basically eliminate in your reaction being an errand boy, right, with Lilith in the sixth house. And actually in all of the placements, your reaction, your own feminine reaction will be to almost rebel or thwart it by not becoming anything in the house. But then that's when you kind of will feel like a bum. So the key is to recognize the resistance from why you want to work for Lilith or work at all. Like Lilith can make you cripple in the sense that you don't want to work at all because you become Lilith's errand boy. So in order to really help oneself, you have to become your own personal assistant. And with Lilith in the sixth house, a man who's able to embody that is actually healing the matriarch within him that might have felt rejected as well. Like maybe he was like the personal assistant to the matriarchs in his life, and then it plays that way out in his sexually provocative situations. And so this could be somebody who, a lot of people will say like Lilith in the sixth house is like sex at work. And that could definitely be the case. But I really feel like sometimes it's the depletion and the diminishing of his own energy that you couldn't even find something like that. You couldn't find a situation like that because you are, and if it is sex at work, is a deeply dominant submissive type of situation, and Lilith is the one who is dominating over him, which can really hurt. But you've seen things like this. You've seen these submission dominant roles in life before. You'll see it all the time, and quite often it's probably going to be a man who has Lilith in the sixth or the eighth house, who might be suffering some submission dominant situations that aren't favorable, basically. So in the sixth house, he is learning how to become his own personal attendant. And when he's able to do that, he starts to care for himself and his health in a way that is really intoxicating. And you'll see that he becomes the rake. Honestly, I should have said this for all of these, but that's what he can be. He can become his own like provocative male figure because he's embodied Lilith himself. And we really forget that, like that part of being able to be charming and charismatic to women and maybe even break their hearts too, is being able to and conjoin his feminine consciousness with his male with his masculinity, with his male sex, actually. And so many men are scared of that, but it serves them quite a bit, especially when we're dealing with Lilith, because without it, the rejection will show up in so many ways. So this could also be being diminished at work, not having the right positions at work due to somebody trying to keep you down, usually some sort of feminine energy trying to keep you in your place. You're her errand boy. Why would she want you to change? And he may be stuck in this place where he either doesn't want to work at all, or he is succumbed to the errand boy title in order because he fears of rejection. So the key here is really being able to tend to yourself so that you actually highly value yourself, and you can actually teach Lilith or help Lilith, bring the light to Lilith on how Lilith can actually work for herself too. So that feminine energy that is kind of you want to provide for her all the time, but if you don't teach her how to provide for herself or help her to provide for herself, then it becomes again that codependency relationship, and it actually does not serve the man in that regards, because especially in this position, he can really feel diminished in his masculinity. Okay, in the 7th house, Lilith in the man's chart is more than likely connected to a matriarch that treated him like a partner, right? And that matriarch is going to be something that does not have to be the mother. It could be another, elder person that he was around, or just some sort of like overall concept of carving him out to be a marriage partner, in which he himself may not want to do that. This might be a typical commitment phobe. And I've said this about Lilith in the 7th house. And so it's really just transferred as in from the masculine point of view, and so Lilith is like wanting everything in the marriage as she wants it. And he may want to provide for his partner, provide company, right? Basically Lilith is providing their, like they're walking with them everywhere. They're just the company, walking around with them anywhere they want to go or anything like that. And he can also be like maybe very good looking, so he also makes Lilith look good looking. That could also be something that's happening here. And so can be lose identity with Lilith, become just Lilith's partner versus having their own identity, classic 7th house stuff, and has to figure out how to pull himself out of the provocation of wanting to entice Lilith to be Lilith's companion all the time, right? So really he's able to provide for her the ability to find her other partnerships, business maybe, if you don't want it to be, if you're in a monogamous relationship, because 7th house is marriage. But Lilith really needs to harness her own partnerships outside of just one person. And this is what he can learn to do for himself, and then what he can also help provide Lilith with. But that deep rejection is coming from a fear of being rejected for maybe his own style, his own fashion, his own sense of who he is. And maybe that could, it could, depending on the sign and what's going on, that could have a lot to do with this is what a man is supposed to look like, and that almost paralyzes him to only style his self in order to be complementary to his partner. So the key is to definitely be complementary, but to not lose oneself in being that, and to not always have to do it in order to kind of give Lilith everything that she wants, versus giving her the tools to kind of find other people that she can partner up with. Platonic partnerships can come here, but Lilith may not want platonic partnerships, may just want the provocation of that deep sexual vibe that he brings to the table. And vice versa. Like, he may also be codependent upon Lilith, because she too may give a sense of wholeness, and really the fear of rejection or experiencing rejection for him would actually maybe make him feel like he is not whole. So yeah, really when we're getting into these houses 6, 7, and 8, we're finding like the character of the man can really diminish themselves, because these houses are really about others, and really truly can lose oneself. Okay, Lilith in the eighth house. Lilith is, the biggest thing here is that he has a deep fear of his actual sexual, performance. And Lilith here can also lethally cripple him if she rejects him based off of his sexual performance. And you actually see a lot of people do this all the time, because Lilith is lethal in Scorpionic energy, also in Aries energy in the first house, or in Aries and in Scorpio. She becomes willing to destroy. And so a man who has Lilith in the eighth house could easily be really be crippled by feeling like he's not the sexual partner that Lilith wants, or is not specifically in the performance of that arena. Now, when he nurtures himself and he becomes his own self-assurance, then he can actually become very, very intoxicating and a sexual partner for many, right? And performance for many, but has to also consider that when he does that and he becomes with feminine energy, that the feminine energy itself will want to suck it all up. Okay, this is again going back to that teaching a person how to fish. So he's really going to have to learn restraint and stillness as well, dealing with Lilith in the eighth house, knowing when to give all of his sexual, especially once he has overcome the rejection, right? He's gonna have to know when to give it all up and when to hold some for himself, allowing Lilith to figure out her own sexual power and not just reliance of his. So, it's really quite a journey, because I'm really breaking it down, like the shadow energy and how it shows up, and it makes one feel so crippled, makes a man feel so crippled. And then when he gains his power, he actually still has to harness it, because Lilith is so erratic. So he has to harness his power and learn when to give and withhold once he has his power, right? And this is why, the symbol of the idea of a rake, the concept of a rake, which I got from the Book of Seduction. I forget the name of the book, but it's The Power of Seduction, and they talk about the role player of the male rake and how he can really break hearts. And that's really what a man can become when he harnesses his Lilith, right? But if you want to become a provider, then there's another step beyond the rake, which is restraint, so that, because the rake will just take over. But really what you want is a little bit of restraint. Otherwise, you and Lilith are going to go head to head, and Lilith is lethal, pretty much everywhere, but especially in the eighth house. Okay, and Lilith in the ninth house in a man's chart is going to showcase a deep fear and rejection for his knowledge, his education, and his connection to his father, because the ninth house is also our father's teaching. And he is very provoked by Lilith, who is also very wise. He's very provoked by a wise Lilith here. And the biggest thing here is who's going to be in the seat of the guru. And he can actually be diminished to a student in this ninth house role and lose his status as being very knowledgeable if he's in a fearful state. But it can also be connected to his overall philosophy in life can become very cynical. And I think that this could happen potentially in the ninth and 12th house, because this is where we're looking at our objective beliefs, our far-sighted beliefs. And in the fear state, he can be so provoked by Lilith, sexually or psychologically, or just mentally, right, in the ninth house, that he just really loses his hope for life. And so the key here, again, is that nourishment of self, being able to secure the parts that feel like they are not well educated by doing what you got to do for yourself, instead of externalizing your fear of rejection from another person or another feminine entity. Restore your own knowledge, reinforce your own knowledge, and gain more knowledge if you need. Then you become at that rake status, and you have more of the ability to provide and be, penetrative. And then when Lilith embodies that, that's when you have to learn that restraint and be able to know when you want to give knowledge and when you want to give space for Lilith to acquire her own knowledge, which will really make Lilith free. That's the key with the feminine, is we're trying to create strong energies that are less reactive, because reactive puts you in a state where you're not who you are who you're reacting to, right? So you lose character because your reaction becomes a whole new person, a whole new entity. And it's not quite you, but it's the you that needs to either defend yourself or soothe yourself, right? And and then when it comes, a lot of us feel like we identify with this version of ourselves, but it's not really who we are. And I think you find in the ninth house that this can reign true everywhere, but really in the ninth house, like, because Lilith is a reactor, and the ninth house is high, seeing things from your highest self, and so you really feel out of whack when you react from the ninth house, in that little placement. You really feel how you are pulled out a different character. And I could say that in the third and the ninth house, Lilith can portray like that extreme mental state, and you'll be able to spot that the difference in what it is that is your reaction state, your action role that you're playing, your reaction role, versus the real you. So they're not quite the same things. So, in the ninth house, the male masculine is really trying to work on not being a know-it-all, but harnessing his knowledge for himself, and reinforcing that knowledge for self to feel nurtured by knowledge. Therefore being comfortably able to face the fear of rejection. But then this can be, like how I said, the third house is like mansplaining. This could be like completely like unstoppable train just pulverizing over feminine energy, right? Almost like there is no feminine energy, because the ninth house is so masculine in a lot of ways. So the key here is to give more space, very similar again to the third house, in learning how to listen. If Lilith is in a man's chart in the 10th house, then he may have a fear of being exposed, or fear of just ultimate defamation due to Lilith's ability to destroy the top of the chart in a man's house. And so this is deeply connected to his ability to nurture himself, and the rewards, the recognition, and the feat that he has already accomplished. Feat, F-E-A-T, the feat. And it sounds like I'm saying defeat, but that's really good, because the other word that ties into this is this feeling of defeat when rejected by Lilith, or the fear of being rejected by Lilith. It's very possible that this is another house that could have a submission dominance issue in the upbringing, and it does not have to be with the mother, but it could also be any matriarch energy, because Lilith is connected to the feminine and how he experienced the feminine in his development. What parts of his own feminine aspects were rejected, right? And it may have been like being like corrected in front of other people, or certain things that made him feel like he was embarrassed, or things like that could also come up here. And we have to really understand that and when it comes to the masculine, he's more seeing, he's more dealing with the fear of the surrendering of the ego, all of these things. So the 10th house could also be very crippling here. And the key is to, again, nurture, nourish, and reinforce what he has accomplished. Also, maybe making a plan for what's next, for what his recognition or legacy might be. But also not being too attached to a plan, like maybe making one, but also knowing that the universe has its own plan. So that's also in the 9th house, this higher self that he needs to connect more to from a feminine, nurturing space. Then he really becomes like that CEO or that rake energy of the masculine, where he's deeply attractive and provocative to the feminine. And then the feminine will want him to maybe, help her be recognized, help her achieve her goals. And he can definitely do that. But again, it's that ability to teach her how to fish versus just fish for her, so that the feminine doesn't become codependent on him. Because once she is, then Lilith is going to break free and be extremely rebellious in that nature. And it's really important to see here that she meaning the feminine nature of Lilith, which is, when I say she, it could be his own feminine nature or an actual person that embodies that role, right? Might be somebody who's in the career field, similar career, similar industry as well. And this is something that could work very well if that happens, once he has been able to harness his own fears of rejection and able to also know how to restrain and hold when he wants to help manage her and when she needs to manage herself, right? So that's Lilith in the 10th house of a man's chart. Lilith in the 11th house of a man's chart is connected to his alliances, his friendships. And this is a place where the feminine is kind of willing to be provocative for him and his friends. And so he can actually have a deep fear of rejection, of popularity. This is somebody who could overcompensate by trying to do things to impress his friends with a feminine, external feminine person, right? But it could experience also not defamation, like the 10th house was similar in the sense of a sense of embarrassment or a sense of not being popular or fear of that thing. And so might overcompensate by overdoing it with that Lilith energy. Like basically Lilith is, in a threesome, basically. And so the biggest thing he has to do is learn restraint in when he wants to use Lilith for his popularity and when he wants to actually nurture his own popularity. So this might be looking at the parts of himself that he finds favorable, that he thinks will be, that he finds is philanthropic, like that he finds is connected to humanity and wanting to be a better person. This is key here, because if you have Lilith here in the 11th house and you're not caring about those things, more than likely you're in that reactionary state of Lilith, and he is not wanting to care about anyone. That will make sense, being that he may have a fear of that rejection, a fear of being popular, fear of being criticized by everybody who's watching. You know what I'm saying? That 11th house is like not having the support that you want, that you need, not having people who have your back. And so the key here is to, again, hone in on what are the things that he feels good about himself, that he knows people will enjoy about him too. What are the things that he wants to do to make himself better and progressive in society? And then he will become that emblem of a provocative masculine that groups and all kinds of feminine will really want to enjoy and be provided for. And then once he gets that, he'll have to practice the restraint of not overusing the Lilith energy to gain more popularity, right? And when Lilith is able to be independent, she too can actually venture out into her own social groups. And they may not be the same as his, but it will be important to see that that freedom really helps them both to be stronger and more confident, so that the reaction to the fear of rejection is not really the thing that is holding him back. Okay, now in the 12th house, we have a man who has Lilith in the 12th house, and he may really have a lot of fears and phobias, because the 12th house literally rules over this. And this can be things that kind of keep you from fearing of going outside, fearing of wanting to be seen, and also there's like this fear of the spiritual goodness, like fear of heaven and things like that. And it's kind of odd, but I think that what's happening here is when a masculine has Lilith in the 12th house, he may feel like Lilith can dominate over his subconscious. And he could be like swimming in feminine energy and almost being. There's actually a show called American Gods, and I believe that's what it's called. And the woman who embodies Lilith, she is a black woman, and she basically like sucks them all the way up into her vagina. And I feel like this is that 12th house position where he can be completely engulfed and enmeshed in all the feminine around him. And on a deep subconscious level is being dominated by the feminine around him. And it doesn't always have to be aggressive. It could actually be because she's sexually provocative, because she is alluring, that he has no will, he has no connection. He almost worships her completely, right? So it's like the land of the goddess of the Amazon warrior, where men are belittled and enslaved versus equal, right? And so his own masculinity is vanquished or completely gone by the succubus energy. Natural succubus energy with Lilith in the 12th house in a man's chart. Natural succubus. And you can find it everywhere because, like I said, if you just fish for Lilith anywhere in the houses, she's just going to take it all up, right? But in the 12th house, this is why, because she is the dark matter. And in the 12th house, in this dark matters in the subconscious. And so there's so much that she can hold from him, for him to forget his own masculinity and for her to completely sabotage him from himself. So with all that being said, the 12th house is deeply powerful because when he's able to nurture himself on a subconscious level, this might be in like doing a lot of therapy, doing detachment practices, right? Being able to find the light, find hope again. These are things that might be really nourishing for his subconscious, and then he'll be able to show up as the rake, who actually is deeply penetrative just by his aura and his state of being. Like his frequency is just so captivating because he's worked on his subconscious beliefs about himself and has brought back up his sense of who he is, and is not being overcome or like literally losing all of his value to, like it's like a man who goes to a strip club and loses all of his money or spends all of his money or goes gambling. Like this is the place where you lose everything in addictions and stuff like that, and Lilith is just happy to take it, and it's not to say that those places are bad. It's great to be in those places, to have fun, but if it depletes you completely, that's when Lilith is really on her takeover, that goddess dark matter shit. So he really has to learn how to help his internal subconscious belief turn back on. And when he's able to do that, he can actually provide for Lilith spirituality, a sense of connection to the other world, a sense of her own mystery and her own secrets, right, and sacredness, and they can share that together, and he can learn to restrain so he doesn't overpower her. 12th and 9th house, when the masculine becomes too overpowering, once he has owned his own Lilith feminine energy, he can become a rake, right? He could become too done, and this could be like kind of cult-like a little bit in the 9th and the 12th house. So in order to refrain from that, he needs to learn his own restraint. His own Lilith energy is erratic. Lilith is not stable at all, right? So once you get it, you have to like harness it, regulate it constantly. And when he's able to really do that, right, you're going to find that his ability to help Lilith will be even more beautiful, because she too in the 12th house wants to be free, be sovereign, right, and fights for it, and then becomes something not so kind when she does, not so compassionate when she does. But if he provides the freedom for her, then you get actually a Lilith who can consciously help heal the world in so many ways. And that Lilith that I'm speaking of specifically is like maybe a feminine energy. So that is a Lilith in a man's chart. And again, if you guys would like to dive into your own Lilith, check out the Lilith pages down below. I created them with my own hands and my own heart, and they really help with understanding all the Liliths in your chart and knowing where they are, and then also doing some shadow work with the Lilith placements in your chart. So I hope that this will be useful to you, and I thank you for trusting in me. Please give me a like and help me to amp up those views so I can tend to the family and keep doing that work. Peace and love.